I guess that is touche. All right, let's go to Matthew chapter 5. We left off at verse 41. We finished verse 40. That's what I show. Just to remind you, the last point we were making over this section, which covers really, 38 through 40. And he's going to really kind of continue the thought. But at least this little section of verses 38 through 40, what is happening here is kind of the closing thought that we mentioned is that Jesus is not questioning the right to go to law, but the motive. So keep that in mind. He's not saying you can never keep what is yours and you should just give everything away. And sometimes somebody, may say, well, what about that rich young ruler? Jesus told him to give away everything he had. That was individual to him. And Jesus makes that point. He says, we've studied him in a sermon and in Bible classes as well. The problem was, his riches ruled over him. His possessions possessed him instead of the other way around. And so that was a unique situation to him. And Jesus says, okay, you're doing all this other stuff, but Jesus knew where his heart was. His heart was covetous and greedy. And so he says, you lack one thing. Go and sell what you have and give it to the poor. Come follow me and you'll have treasure in heaven. And he went away sorrowful because... Do what? Yeah, he says give to the poor. So, anyway, he's not saying it's wrong, that it's wrong to retain anything of your own, but he's teaching, maintaining a proper attitude toward others and making every effort on our part to be people of peace, people who are meek, and people who are not just people of peace, but peacemakers, as Jesus talks about earlier in the chapter. So that was kind of where we left off. Verses 41 and 42, he's continuing this thought here. Whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain or two. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. So he's teaching here in 41 and 42 about, we sometimes say, going the second mile or second mile Christianity, something like that. Here's an instance where you need to have some knowledge of custom and history of the times. It's helpful to have that here, and really it might even be fair to say, at least in this instance, it is almost necessary to understand this. You could understand, you could get the idea without it, but it certainly helps open this up. In Roman culture in the first century, Rome, of course, was the ruling power. Palestine was a colony of Rome. The Jews, and I don't know if you remember this, but without getting into a whole lot of detail, you had even almost like different, I don't know if I'd say different levels of colonies, but they certainly, some of them had a different status, such as, I'm trying to think of one that would fall under this, that they kind of had they had a lot more privileges. Being born there would make you a Roman citizen. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. Bob, can you think of one? Philippi. Okay, yeah, Philippi. Philippi was one of those. And what was the word we used for that? It's just escaping me. Connor, you know that word? There's for a Roman city that they, if you're born there, you have citizenship. They're kind of higher on the totem pole, so to speak, of Roman cities. Jerusalem was a city that was considered part of the Roman Empire, but they didn't have the privileges that a place like Philippi would have. It's just not coming to me. But anyways, that's the idea. There are certain cities that they had a higher status, but the Jews, they were under Roman rule, right? As someone who is under Roman rule, and this actually dates back, most historians say it dates back to even the Persian government, that this practice kind of started under the Persian Empire, but Rome kind of made it a law that if here's a soldier and he's going along and he's got his rucksack, as we would say now, and it's, he may be carrying a lot of stuff, it could be weapons, it could, whatever. but it's not light. You know, any soldier will tell you that even now. They carry a rucksack, and it's, what'd you say, Aaron? What's the average weight of a rucksack? 100? Woo, I didn't know that. I was thinking like 50. But you know, they're not light. And, you know, you're carrying all this stuff, and this soldier's carrying his stuff, and where is he going? Maybe going anywhere. But he's walking along, and he sees someone, and here's a Jewish person, and it might be somebody else, but it's a conquered person. And the Roman soldier can do what? He can say, hey, you, carry this for me. Well, by law, you had to do it, right? You don't have a choice. But the law, and what they would consider, you know, well, we have limits here. And so the law was what? You carry it a mile. And then you can put that down, and he's had his break, he carries on, or finds somebody else. And so you can imagine a lot of folks, Jewish and otherwise, who would be compelled to carry some kind of burden, and you can almost just picture them counting the steps. And when they hit that last step, they stop and they say, and just drop it and say, 1 mile, leave me alone. I'm out of here. You know, maybe you're headed this way, and you come to a crossroad. He's headed the opposite way. Maybe you just came from that direction, but you're trying to get further down the road that way, and he says, hey, you're going to have to carry this for me. Well, you think that's always convenient? It's sometimes, no doubt, demeaning. And so a lot of times they would carry it just exactly 1 mile and then drop it and say, get out of here, leave me alone. Can't believe I wasted my time with this. You're a jerk, you know, whatever. Jesus says, don't just stop at the 1 mile. Go another mile. You think that would make an impression? I mean, you think Roman soldiers were used to people doing that when they would compel them? You can picture a lot of folks as they're carrying this burden, murmuring under their breath, and maybe that soldier, especially, you know, maybe he's just really fit and in fighting shape, says, what'd you say? Nothing. You know, he just kind of murmuring under his breath. But here's one fellow, head held high, and he says, all right. And he goes, and he walks, and they get to the mile part, and the Roman soldiers kind of, maybe at first he's going, what's this dummy doesn't even know he's reached a mile yet. And then they keep going, and he says, what are you doing, man? I'm carrying your burden. Well, and I hate to bring this up, but, you know, we passed a mile a ways back there. Well, I know. Why are you still carrying it? Well, because I'm a Christian. I follow Jesus, the Christ, and, you know, he set an example, and Christians do more. I'm trying to be more like him every day of my life. And so we'll keep going. You take your break. You know, it's heavy. So we'll keep going. Can you imagine the impact that would have? Man, especially after, like I said, no doubt how many times they received such a strong reaction against it. By the way, we have an example of this law being implemented in Scripture. Not implemented, or at least used, we'll put it that way, in Scripture. What is that? It's at the crucifixion of Jesus, or on the way, because they come and the text says they compel a man named Simon of Cyrene, or Cyrene, to bear the cross. Well, that's an example. Old Simonary, he's not doing that out of the goodness of his heart. I'm not saying necessarily he wouldn't have. I don't know. We're not really told a whole lot about him. But he didn't have a choice. Whether he wanted to do it or not, he was going to have to. And so he carried the cross for certain ways. But that's an example of that law being enforced upon someone. So that's what Jesus is referring to here. And again, this is one of those situations where when you know that, you begin to see how impactful this would be. If you're, instead of counting down the exact steps till I get to exactly 1 mile, I keep going, and, if and when this person questions, I say, well, I'm a Christian. You want me to tell you more about Jesus? And, not everybody's going to say, yeah, tell me more. But I guarantee you it would make an impression, wouldn't it? And there may very well be some who would say, yeah, I want to know more about this fella who would cause someone to do that. That probably almost never happened to those soldiers when they would have to force someone to carry their load. Especially, again, with Jews. No doubt the Jews probably gave them some of the harshest of reactions to this when they were compelled to bear a burden, because the Jews generally, not every single one, but generally, they hated Gentiles. They despised the idea of Gentiles ruling over them. Some of the Jews even went so far as to have this personal feeling, and I don't know if they, in some instances they did. They bound it upon others that even having personal physical contact with Gentiles would make you ceremonially unclean. It would defile you in some way. So you can imagine. I was listening last night. We were on the way home, the boys and I, and we were listening to a lesson from PTP. I don't know, it's been a few years ago. I can't remember what year we were listening to, but we wanted to, we were kind of looking through the list of speakers, decided we were going to listen to Greg Dismuke, who held our fall meeting here in 2019. I want to say last year, but technically that was not last year. Had to get used to that now, right? But he was talking about, I can't remember what the passage was that he was talking about, but he says, it's when the fella says, I'm going to come and follow you, Lord, but let me first go home and bury my father. And he's getting ready to mention what Jesus says, and he says, I sometimes tell folks, church, I don't think we would like Jesus if he was our preacher. I sometimes think the church wouldn't like Jesus if he were our preacher. And I got to thinking about that, and the wheels kind of got turning. I thought, boy, there are a lot of passages in Scripture where, can you imagine if your local preacher stood up in the pulpit and said something like that? That I understand Jesus is the Son of God. He's God in the flesh. And so there are things that he says that no mere man could say rightfully. But there are some hard sayings, right? And Jesus' response on that occasion was what? Let the dead bury their own dead. You follow me, you preach the kingdom. Man, if you said that to some folks today, whoa, what are you trying to say? What's the implication there? I don't like that. I don't like your tone. I don't like how you put that. There are all kind of things that people might. Well, here's another occasion, because with how strongly the Jews felt against Gentiles, and especially against Roman rule, and the idea that I have to carry this fellow's burden, well, I'll just do it that 1 mile. 1 mile, no more. And here Jesus says, no. You go an extra mile. I don't think they would have liked Jesus as their local preacher. But it had to cause some anger. Had to ruffle some feathers on that occasion, don't you think? Don't you know? Well, spiritual application of this concept of going a second mile, I think about the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10. Obviously, that's a good example. He not only stopped and helped, he puts him on his own beast, carries him to an inn, looks after him best he can. He has to leave. He leaves money with the innkeeper, says, if you go over what I've left you, if there's any more expense, I'll pay that when I come again. I mean, this guy went like the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th mile. And he's a Samaritan. Whereas the Jewish brethren, the priest and the Levite, they just kept on going. Think about Paul and his dealings with Philemon and Onesimus, the runaway slave. They're in the book of Philemon. That's certainly Paul he's going the 2nd mile, and he's also imploring Philemon to go the 2nd mile. He's exhorting Onesimus to go the 2nd mile. You've become a Christian, but you got some things that need to be made right here. You got some unfinished business. You need to go home, and I'm going to implore your master, what at that time was his former master. Well, it still was his master, I guess. He says, I'm going to implore him to go the second mile and treat you like a brother, not like a slave, a servant. But you still, regardless, you got to go the extra mile and tie up this loose end, as we would say. I think about what Jesus did for all humanity. He was reviled. He didn't revile again, committed himself to God, 1 Peter 2, 21 through 24. So, certainly not an easy thing here that Jesus says, but what an impact it has when it's put into practice. So many examples that we could give, real-life examples, modern-day examples, and of the effect it had on others to go that second mile. Now, going to verse 42, give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow, him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. This is an interesting verse, and people tend to extremes so often. Sometimes you got the one extreme of just no questions asked. You just give and give and give to the point you can actually become an enabler. But then you've also got the other extreme where somebody maybe because they've experienced that, or they've experienced someone taking advantage of them, or someone who pretended to need it, but they didn't really have a need, they just wanted it. Maybe they were lazy or whatever, and so they become jaded, cynical, and it kind of becomes, I don't help anybody. And, I often say it's easy for preachers to get that way. Because sometimes, preachers, especially if you're full-time and you're at the building, even some during the week, a lot of times people are coming by, and sometimes you discover that somebody has just lied through their teeth, as the saying goes, and they've taken advantage. But that extreme, doesn't justify going to this extreme over here and just give without any kind of questions or anything. This extreme doesn't justify the other extreme. And so we got to be careful with that. J.W. McGarvey mentions this: no lending was provided for by the law of Moses except for benevolent purposes, for no interest was allowed, and all debts were canceled every seventh year. You read about that, of course, in reading of the law and the Pentateuch there in Genesis through Deuteronomy. He goes on, the giving and lending referred to then are limited to cases of real want, and the amount given or loaned is to be regulated accordingly. Well, are there times when God's children ask of him and God says no? So, obviously God's our pattern. So would we be justified then sometimes when someone comes and says, I have a need, can you give me whatever? It might be food, housing, money, and we say no. Is there ever a time when we would be justified in doing so? Obviously, God does that with his own children. The New Testament does teach that Christians must be willing to assist others. Got to be. You read about this in Matthew 25. We'll come to that later on in our study of Matthew. Galatians 6:10, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good to all men, especially those of the household of faith. Pure religion, undefiled before God and the Father, is to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, to keep oneself unspotted from the world, James 1:27. On and on we could go. Listen, even if I've had a bad experience in the past helping somebody, I can't just conclude that it's better. You know what? I'm done with this. I'm done helping people. I'm so sick of it. I've been burned. I've been lied to. I've been taken advantage of, and I got the solution. I'm not helping anybody again. Now, would that be a good way to behave myself? It certainly isn't a godly way, is it? It's easy to get to that point, I'm telling you, from experience. You get to the point sometimes you get jaded, you get cynical, you get suspicious of everybody. But it's not right to just decide, I'm just not going to help anybody anymore. The New Testament teaches we got to be willing to help others. But we also have to understand, there's a flip side to that coin, obviously, that, and by the way, aren't you glad that Jesus, when he walked this earth, and that God, our Heavenly Father, doesn't say, you know what, people have taken advantage of me. Sometimes even, if I'm honest, and I think if you're honest too, have we just taken advantage of God's blessings sometimes, squandered them, wasted them? Maybe begged God in prayer for something I had to have that really was a want, not a need. Aren't you glad God doesn't say, you know what, I got a solution for this. I'll just cut you off. You don't get any more help from me, buddy. I know I'm glad personally that God hasn't done me that way. But we also need to realize that everybody has a responsibility to take care, do everything within his power to provide for his family. Talking about the husband, the head of the household. You got that responsibility, right? In fact, Paul says what? If you don't provide for your own, especially those of your own household, I mean, it's pretty strong language, right? 1 Timothy 5:8. If you don't do that, you've denied the faith, and you're worse than an infidel. That's amazing. And when you stop and think about that, let that sink in. So everybody has a right to provide for their own family. But, things happen in life sometimes that are not somebody's fault. You may stand in need of financial or even material assistance. There could be an accident. There could be a death. What about a sister who her husband maybe is a hard-working person and a terrible accident and he dies suddenly? Should the church step in and try to help out? There are other factors to consider as well, but that wouldn't be a situation where we say, well, you know what, she's capable of working, let her go get a job. Well, what about right now? Well, what about the immediate aftermath there? Nobody's saying let's just say, hey, you're on the payroll indefinitely. But there may be an immediate need. Same thing, here's a brother who loses a job. Medical expenses, sometimes that happens. So we also understand any person who is too lazy to work should not be assisted. Paul deals with this in 2 Thessalonians 3:10-12. And this is a big one. And sometimes, when it's a matter of the church helping out, this is sometimes something that we try to find out. Are you able to work? If you're not, then why not? Are you trying to get a job? I understand sometimes people are trying and they can't. Sometimes there's a situation where you're just not able to get a job right now for whatever reason. But, even Christians can face situations where a job runs out suddenly or a medical expense, a medical emergency, whatever it may be. Even Christians can deal with that. No one of us is required to give away everything we have. I think we all understand that, right? Because if, poor old Billy comes to me and maybe he's genuinely in need and he says, hey, here's this situation, it's an emergency, it's unplanned for, I'm a hardworking person, but I have a need, and I say, hey, let me sign over my whole bank account to you and I'll take care of that. Well, guess what? Now I'm the guy who's in position of being worse than an infidel because I go home and say, oh, honey, I don't know what we're going to do about rent. Obviously not an situation, not an issue for us living in the preacher's house, but, in that situation, what we're going to do about the mortgage? What are we going to do about bills? Oh, I don't know, but I helped this brother who was in need. And my wife's going, well, that doesn't feed the children. That doesn't, it doesn't put food on the table. It doesn't heat the house and so on. You don't have to give away everything we have. If a person's too lazy to work, they're not to be assisted. Paul makes that point in 2 Thessalonians 3:10-12. What about if a person asks for money and we know sometimes they just come out and tell you that it's going to be for booze, cigarettes, something like that? Well, I'm not going to render any assistance in that case. The sign that the picture you sometimes see, and it's meant to be humorous. I think it's quite disgusting, really, with a fellow holding up a sign. Maybe he's standing by the interstate off ramp or on ramp, and it says, "Why lie? It's for booze." You're not getting a dime from me. That's, if I know that, I'm not gonna give money for that. So how do we apply this teaching? That's, of course, what we're getting to here. How do we apply this teaching from Jesus? Well, when he says, do not refuse to give, what you give, how much you give, might be decided by a lot of factors, but what Jesus is saying here, one factor that will not decide this is a closed heart. Now, I may evaluate the situation and determine, this is not a situation where I need to help, or even as, talking with the church, where the church needs to help. But it can't just be because, I'm I'm sick of helping people and they take advantage of me or whatever. He says, don't have a closed heart. We need to consider the person who is receiving the gift. You can do some due diligence, right? Is this person a fraudulent beggar? Or is this someone who is in genuine need? And sometimes you can tell the difference, and sometimes you can't. And I have said before, I would rather stand before God on the day of judgment and have God say, you know what, Chad, you in all good conscience helped this gentleman over here on that particular day, and he was lying. He had that story so polished, and he told it to 18 different churches before he came to the Bremen Church of Christ, and you helped him. But you know, you did that genuinely wanting to help somebody. Well done. You were trying to be like what the Lord would have you to be like. And you did your homework. You did the best you could to try to determine. But yeah, he was lying. I would much rather have that to be the case than to have the flip side of that coin be the case and have the Lord say, you know what, you checked and you checked and you just decided, hey, this doesn't seem to add up to me. You turned him away, but Chad, he really had a need. He really wasn't lying. He was telling the truth the whole time, and you turned him away. I heard a story that years ago, I can't remember the golfer's name, was a famous golfer. He had just won a tournament, and this before they would do the fancy, huge checks that I guess those aren't even real checks. I don't know. Happy Gilmore carried around a whole bunch of them in his car, but they gave this golfer a check, and this lady came up after it was over, after the tournament was over. He has his check in hand, and she has this sob story. Her child is dying, just an infant, dying, and she doesn't even have money to pay rent. They haven't eaten in like 3 days, and she was laying it on thick. And he just felt so bad, he literally took his check, signed it over, and gave it to her. She walked away. Another fella came over, a rival who kind of didn't really like him too much anyways, and he says, you know that she just scammed you. And he was almost making fun of him for it, like, you gullible dummy. And he says, she just scammed you, man. You just signed over your whole winnings? And he said, wait a minute. So she's not just so desperate for money? No. He says, she's not starving? He said, no, she's not starving. Her child is not on the brink of starving to death? No. He said, man, that's the best news I've had all day. I'm glad to hear that. Well, he's not glad in the sense of, I'm so glad somebody scammed me, but what he's saying there is, look on the bright side. At least this situation is not as dire as I thought it was. And so, sometimes you look for the rainbow amidst the storms, right? You try to make lemonade out of lemons. My point being, I'd rather err on the side of helping somebody and find out later that they didn't need it. That doesn't mean I'm just going to, every person that comes up, go, yeah, I'm going to help you, because I'd rather err on the side of, we still need to do due diligence. But you know what? Like I said, if I get to heaven one day and stand before the Lord and he says, well, this person lied, but you did what you could. You tried to find out. You just got scammed. I'd rather have that happen than God said, well, you just closed your heart there. But this was a person who really was telling the truth. We also need, number 3, don't close your heart. Consider the receiver, the potential receiver of the gift. Number 3, consider the kind of gift that is to be given. Here's something that's interesting. Should the gift be according to, or the help, the benevolence, be according to the request or according to the need? And again, sometimes it may be, maybe somebody comes and says, my power bill is about to be cut off. This actually happened, by the way, several years ago. I was here at Bremen. Somebody came and said, my power is about to be cut off. I'm so behind, and they're going to cut it off. I said, okay, well, I'll talk to, we have a deacon who handles that, and I'll talk to him. Maybe we'll talk to the elders. How much is it? So, well, I got to pay. They said I had to pay the amount I was behind or something. Bottom line, it came up to like $500. I was like, Whoa. Another one came one time. It was rent. A month or so behind, about to be evicted. $700, wasn't it, Blake? This was not that terribly long ago. $700. Okay, well, I thought about, before I knew the number, I thought, well, maybe I might be able to help. You know, maybe my family could help. Maybe even go to another couple of men around here in the congregation, and maybe and then I find out $700. Well, should I help according to that request or according to need? You know, there's a greater need there. How are you getting $500 behind on your power bill? How are you getting to a point where you owe $700 for last month's rent, you can't pay this month, and now you're even about to be evicted? So you're talking more like $1,400 there. There may be something else that needs to be addressed. You know, it's the old adage, you can give a man a fish or you can teach him how to fish. Which is more beneficial? Well, in the short term, that fellow may be like, no, just give me some fish. I'm hungry. But in the long term, teaching him how to fish is a lot better. One fellow said, he asked the question, is it always possible to know another's real need? You know, sometimes employment for a wage could restore a man's self-respect like no handout ever could. That's true. Other men might be saved from poverty by a gift disguised as a loan. Is the gift going to contribute to someone's delinquency by encouraging him to continue begging when he could and should work? Or is it going to result in the person's best interest by making him a better man or a better woman, as the case may be? One time I was downtown Atlanta. This was years ago. I think I was still single at the time. Went to, I think, a Thrashers games. You know, it's been several years ago. And parked outside, and this fella comes up, and he's asking for money. And so I told him, I said, I don't know where I had the idea. I'd heard it somewhere. I told him, I said, look, you know, I could just give you some money, but I prefer to, you know, say when I want money, I go and I work. And I said, you know, you seem like a nice gentleman. I wouldn't want to demean you with just a handout. So I tell you what, I said, look, you know, we're downtown Atlanta. It's kind of, you know, a little shady sometimes. So if you'll watch my car right here, you'll keep an eye on my car. When I come out of this game, I'm going to give you $20. He said, well, no. I said, no, look, I'm going to give you a chance to earn $20. Easy money. It wasn't cold weather or anything. I said, just keep an eye on it. And when I come out, I'm going to give you $20. And so I said, I don't have cash right now anyways. I have to get some out anyways. I can't give you anything right now if I want to. Well, okay. And I was trying to remember as I was thinking about that today. I racked my brain, and I cannot remember whether he was still out there when I got out of that game. I'm thinking he was not, but then I got to thinking about that, and I thought, maybe I remember him giving him some money. But anyway, but I was, you know, like I said, I don't know where I got that idea. It wasn't original with me, but I thought that was a pretty neat thing when I heard about it, is here's a chance to earn some money instead of me just handing money over and perpetuating the begging. You know, it's not a long-term solution in that situation either, but, you know, it's consider the kind of gift to be given. That's what we're saying here. Number 4, give as secretly as possible. Jesus is going to cover this in Matthew 6, verses 2 through 4. Sometimes, especially when you're dealing with a genuine need, sometimes even the slightest bit of publicity can really humiliate someone. And a lot of times that's a situation. If somebody wants to just go around telling everybody, well, how I'm in need, and please, everybody, give me some. A lot of times that is kind of a tell that maybe there's more going on here, and this is not a genuine need. This is somebody who's getting into the professional begging type thing. Each situation has to be evaluated individually, and we understand that, but I did want to cover that verse because, you know, if we don't take some time to break that down, we could go to one of those extremes, and certainly we don't want to do that. Want to stay balanced when it comes to helping folks. Don't ever close your heart, but do your due diligence. And if it comes down to a toss-up, as we might say, I don't know about you, but I'm going to err on the side of caution. I'm going to err on the side of helping somebody. I'd much rather do that than to turn out it might be one of the least of these my brethren, as Jesus put it. 43 through 48, Jesus teaches about loving your enemies. Again, he's going to say, you've heard it said, you love your neighbor and hate thine enemy. The law never said, hate your enemy. They added that, of course. The law says to love your neighbors as yourself. This also included strangers that dwell in the land, Leviticus 19:34. Through the years, the Jews had developed this traditional thought, again, it's not in the law, that it was okay to hate Gentiles. You could hate them. Love your neighbor as yourself, but, hate your enemy. Of course, Jesus is going to say, but I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. Well, Jesus, again, he's going to teach different from what their traditional thinking is. He's not changing the law of Moses here. He's changing their thinking, their wrong thinking about the law itself. If we love those that love us, what do you do more than anybody else? I know some of the most crude and immoral people, but if you're nice to them, guess what? They'll be nice to you. I knew people in high school. In fact, that's kind of what they'd say sometimes in college too. Hey, look, you be nice to me, I'll be nice to you, man. We won't have any problem. But you start talking to me like that, you start talking ugly to me, better watch out. Well, Jesus says, if you're just nice to those that are nice to you, if you love those that love you, what reward do you have? Even the publicans do that. Even sinners do that. Jesus says, love your enemies. This is the love that is from the root, agape. It's agapao here. But it's agape. This means, how would you define this? What's a good way to define this word? It's the highest form of love. Several forms of love talked about in Scripture. There's agape. There's Philadelphia, Eros, Philadelphia, or Phileo. I'm thinking of the city, Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. Phileo is the word for love there. Whatever, it's close enough. As I would say to Hainer in Costa Rica, mismo. That drives Hainer crazy. When I say a word wrong, I'll just say mismo. So, he'll correct me, or somebody else will correct me. And mismo means same. And it's kind of, I'll just sort of shrug and say mismo, like same thing. And they're like, no mismo. And but anyway, phileo, brotherly love. Eros is a sexual love. And then what's storge is a familial love. And then you have agape, which is a love that looks out for the best interests of another. Listen to me carefully. Jesus doesn't say be best friends. You're not going to be BFFs with your enemies. But he says seek what is best for them. That's different. In fact, I submit to you, we were talking about this in one of our little online classes that we do on Tuesdays on Zoom with a former classmate of mine from Memphis. He mentioned this. He said, I believe the hardest, the most difficult form of love is phileo, which we're commanded to have for brothers and sisters in Christ, because that involves caring for one another. It's seeking each other's best interest, yes, but it also means a closeness. Agape, you can say, look, I might say, boy, Robert, I don't like you, but you got a soul, and so I want you to go to heaven. So maybe I'm going to offer him a tract. Or, Robert may mistreat me every day at work, and he may be trying to, work against me, undermine me to the boss, whatever, but he's got a soul, and I want that person to go to heaven. And so I'm going to, maybe that person becomes a Christian. Or maybe they're coming to church and start to visit. What do I do? Oh, man. That's one visitor I won't go speak to. No, that's not agape. It gets really difficult if he obeys the gospel then, right? Because then it becomes phileo. That's why I say that can be the most difficult kind. Jesus is not saying become best friends with them, but have genuine care for them and wish and strive for what is best for them. Did Jesus love his enemies? Absolutely. He died on the cross for them. Was he best friends with all of them? Did he ever say to the high priest and some of those Pharisees and Sadducees, can we just sit down and have a meal together and kind of hang out? And I think we could be bros. I think we could be friends. If y'all let's just spend some time together. Now, in fact, Jesus was sometimes, be pretty antagonistic with them, frustrated with them. But he wanted what was best for them in eternity. And even for those people, even for the ones who cried out, his blood be upon us and upon our children, he went to the cross. And that's agape. That's what Jesus is talking about here. The other matters that Jesus talks about here in this whole context can only happen when we have agape love for others. May not be easy to carry out these instructions, but if God commands it, guess what? We can do it. Never said it was going to be easy all the time, right? In fact, he tells us up front many times, it's not always going to be easy. Strive to enter in at the straight gate, he says over in Luke's account, there near the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew's account, he just says, enter ye in at the straight gate. Luke's account says, strive to enter in. The Greek word is agonizo. We get an English word from that. Agony or agonize. And so it's not always easy. But again, Jesus was a perfect model in all these areas. Terribly mistreated, but he never returned it back on them. So if we only show love to people when they're nice to us or when things are going smoothly in our lives, but we stop loving others when they're mean to us, we stop loving others when we face difficulties, we've had a bad day, so we come home and kick the cat, and then we be mean to everybody else. Well, if that's the case, we need to mature and strive to have unwavering love, regardless of the situation. And so he gives an example there in verse 45, that you may be the children of your Father, because he makes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, sends rain on the just and the unjust. We've talked about that before. There are certain blessings of God that he gives to everybody. And he says again, we mentioned it, if you love them that love you, what reward do you have? Publicans do that. If you salute your brethren only, what do you more than others? Do not even the publicans so? Publicans love those that love them, so do sinners. Jesus says in Luke 6:32 and 33. Publicans are kind to those that are kind to them, so are sinners. True followers or disciples of Christ must strive to carry out, verse 44, those instructions at all times. This love must be genuine, not fake. You come to that person, maybe you don't care for them too much, and you say, oh, I'm so concerned about you. Let me just tell you. No, it's got to be genuine. It's got to be demonstrated. It's not just talk. It's got to be unconditional like the Father's. And it's got to be unwavering. Again, he's not saying be best friends, but you seek what's best for them. If we love somebody, we're not just going to not hurt them physically. That's not sufficient. We're going to seek their good. And then in verse 48, he says, be therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. This word is not sinless. This is that Greek word. It's the root telos or teleos here. It means it's kind of a goal, a finish line. It's what you're striving for. It also means maturity, perfection, completion. So he says strive for spiritual maturity. Be full-grown, mature followers of Jesus. He's complete in his love for all people. We must imitate that type of love. We'll stop there, and Lord willing, we'll pick up next week. We'll go into chapter 6, where he's going to shift gears a little bit. He's been talking about motives, but he's going to kind of keep that theme. He shifts gears from this, love for others, but he talks about, he's kind of going to take it into the realm of what is your motive when you're doing good for others, or even when you're praying. We'll talk about that, God willing, next Wednesday night. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate it.